Hello and welcome to the webinar. The topic of today's discussion is the Massachusetts Data Security Law, formerly known as Massachusetts General Law 93H, or 201 CMR 17. Throughout this presentation and others, you will hear the data security law referenced in a number of ways. But each of these identifiers ties back to the same set of provisions and regulations, which is what our presentation looks to address. In fact, the objectives for this presentation are quite simple. First, we are going to reintroduce the law itself and place it into context. I use the term reintroduce here because the law, as you may already know, has undergone several revisions since its inception back in 2007, the most recent of which was approved and finalized by the Massachusetts Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation in November 2009. This first portion of the presentation serves to place our discussion into the context of the law as it stands today. The second phase of our presentation will highlight key components of the data security law that will have a direct impact on your organization and operation. In other words, we will be taking a look at what exactly is expected of you when this law goes into effect on March 1st of this year. And last but not least, the third and final section of this webinar will briefly explain our methodology for helping you meet these expectations and address all the requirements of the Massachusetts Data Security Law. As always, we have designed our services to incorporate a considerable degree of flexibility so that we may tailor them according to your specific needs. Let's begin. Although the Massachusetts Data Security Law has been iterated and reiterated on several different occasions, its intent to prevent ID theft against Massachusetts residents and improve the protection of personal information has been preserved. In other words, the end goal is the same as the original, but the proposed methods for accomplishing this goal have been modified over time in order to offset the initial investment of time, money, and other resources of those expected to comply. This leads us to our second bullet point. Who is expected to comply? MGL 93H is applicable to any person or entity who is responsible for owning or licensing the personal information of a Massachusetts resident. We will further define some of these terms in the next few slides, but in short, the law applies to almost all businesses. As you will see, the state has done a nice job of making many of its own institutions exempt, but the rest of us aren't so lucky. Lastly, and just as a reminder, this law will go into effect on March 1st, 2010. As you are aware, the date for compliance has been pushed back on several occasions, but this appears to be the final date. For the purposes of this law, personal information is defined as a person's first name or initial and last name in conjunction with any of the following: Social Security number, driver's license number or state-issued ID number, financial account number, or credit or debit card number with or without a security code or PIN. The law defines a person as a natural person, corporation, association, partnership, or other legal entity other than an agency, executive office, department, board, commission, bureau, division of authority of the Commonwealth, or any of its branches. Lastly, to own or to license personal information for the purposes of this law means to receive, maintain, process, or otherwise have access to this information as either a service provider or an employer. You can see by these three definitions why most Massachusetts businesses are subject to comply with this law. Moving on, let's take a look at the law's key components. After March 1st, all institutions subject to comply with MGL 93H will be expected to address three principal areas of concern. The first of these areas pertains to the creation of a body of information security policies, referenced in the law itself as a written comprehensive information security program. Secondly, one or more employees should be designated to maintain the program and see that all employees adhere to the policies it contains. Finally, institutions will be expected to take all reasonable and feasible measures to implement administrative, technical, and physical safeguards. As a short aside, the terms reasonable, feasible, and technically feasible are scattered throughout the text of the law. While no formal definition of any of these terms is given, it is safe to interpret them to mean that the strength and breadth of these safeguards should be proportionate to the size of the institution and the quantity of personal information it handles. Before we move on to explain GraVoc's methodology for addressing these requirements, let's look at them in closer detail. The Written Comprehensive Information Security Program can come in all shapes and sizes, but fundamentally, the content it contains should follow the same basic guidelines outlined in the law itself. First, the WISP should outline the institution's overall position with regard to the security of personal information, explaining what the organization will do to protect information. Second, it should outline expectations for employees and vendors alike. What is acceptable and what is unacceptable when it comes to the use and protection of personal information. Thirdly, it should document a response strategy for any potential breach of security. What is the plan of action if a breach occurs? Finally, and this is the part that often is overlooked, it should state how personal information will be destroyed once retention periods have passed. This piece pertains directly to Massachusetts General Law 93I, which is part of the same Code of Massachusetts regulations as 93H, or 201 CMR 17. And here we have a few screenshots of GraVoc's WISP. As you can see from the table of contents on the left, all the essential elements I just mentioned are given the proper attention. You will also notice the section entitled Access Controls in the table of contents. This section of our policy highlights the administrative, technical, and physical safeguards considered necessary to protect personal information. Again, the reasonable and feasible clauses come into play and can be used to our advantage here, as it is often not necessary to employ all the controls listed in each section. Nevertheless, the WISP should indicate that your organization will implement the controls necessary to protect its personal information assets. Let's take a closer look at each of the three. Administrative safeguards are usually overarching controls that relate to the overall management and oversight of information security within the company. As shown on this slide, examples include limiting access to personal information, both physically and technically, by job function, organizing a reporting structure for security incidents, managing the overall information security program, and conducting employee training. A strong information security program would include all of these items. Technical safeguards receive the most attention in the law itself, in part because many of the widely publicized data breaches stem from shortcomings in the security of IT systems and applications. The safeguards shown on this slide are all, in fact, listed within the text of the legislation, and all but those mentioned in the last bullet point, security tokens, biometrics, and digital certificates, are required. The physical safeguard requirements are designed to protect personal information assets existing on paper records, as well as the IT systems where electronic records reside. These safeguards include locks and keys, alarm systems, secure entry systems, and video surveillance. While it is not entirely necessary to have a keycard access system or an entry system controlled by biometrics, what's important is that, in one form or another, access to personal information is physically restricted to those with a legitimate business need to access it.